Hi, this is my review of the Grande Temple of Jing. This is a mega dungeon, but it's also an idea that can potentially turn this mega dungeon into the only mega dungeon that you will ever need. That's somewhat of a bold statement, so I hope I will be able to clarify that as I go further into this review. It's quite notable that this mega dungeon was written by Danny O'Neill. He's the same man that brought us the Dread House mega horror adventure, and if you haven't seen my review of the Dread House, I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can go and check that out. This mega dungeon, the Grande Temple of Jing, also contains levels by Jonathan Tweet, Monte Cook, Skip Williams, Ed Greenwood, Jim Ward, Grimtooth, Stan, Chris Pramas, Larry Wilhelm, and Matt Mayfield. It also contains fiction by Dave Gross and Kevin Andrew Murphy. So as you can see, there are a lot of names here that you have probably seen in other role-playing game adventures and games. So if you like the work of any of those authors, this is probably another incentive to get the Grande Temple of Jing. Now, before we get further into things, this review will contain spoilers. It's supposed to be for game masters, so keep that in mind. Now, what I meant about the Grande Temple of Jing of being an idea that could potentially turn this into the only mega dungeon that you will ever need, or a recurring mega dungeon, is that the Grande Temple of Jing is archetypal, it's modular, it's sort of like the ancestor of all mega dungeons. This mega dungeon is quite challenging. It bends and twists some things that the player characters would expect of a mega dungeon, and there are just so many things to tell you about this mysterious and primal place of danger and wonder. This review will also cover the add-ons that can enhance the content of the Grande Temple of Jing. Now, I'm going to cover each one separately. First the add-ons, and later on the Grande Temple itself. First, let's talk about the music suite, because just like the Dread House, the Grande Temple of Jing features really nice background music that you can use to run the entire thing, or just in certain encounters. I would say that the Grande Temple of Jing music suite is quite enchanting and adventurous. Unlike the Dread House music suite, the Grande Temple of Jing music is quite flexible, universal. You can use it in pretty much any adventure, in any sort of campaign. Although you do have some things that apply perfectly to the Grande Temple of Jing. There are some moments with those trumpeting sounds and some drums that express that sense of grandeur, of immensity and vastness, and possibly an infinity of possibilities when you are exploring the Grande Temple of Jing. The music covers all sorts of situations. Some parts of this music piece remind you of some exciting encounters. Others feel a bit more on the silly side. Others feel a bit creepy and moody, and this reflects the eclectic nature of the Grande Temple of Jing. The Grande Temple, being an archetypal dungeon, contains pretty much everything that you would find in any sort of mega dungeon available. If you see a mega dungeon that features dark cults, mysterious plotlines, and forbidden secrets, you can find that in the Grande Temple of Jing. But if there are some other mega dungeons that feature interactions between different factions that aren't completely hostile, or you can see some places that remind you of a vast wilderness, unexplored underground, or perhaps many different treasures that were thought to be forgotten or that have never existed, the Grande Temple of Jing contains all of that and more. So this music suite will be useful not only for the Grande Temple of Jing, but for any adventure that you will run in your role-playing game career, any sort of campaign as well. So I consider this a really nice option to get with the Grande Temple of Jing. I wouldn't consider it a must-have, but an add-on that you should strongly consider, not only for the Grande Temple of Jing, but for any sort of adventure and campaign. Different segments from the music suite can easily be used for different encounters, all sorts of flavors and themes in adventures. And as you may have noticed, I have been playing a bit of the music in the background, and I will play other segments throughout the course of this review. Now moving on to the next add-on, which is the mini screen inserts for the Game Master. They display some really nice looking panels with illustrations featuring scenes that you would find in the Grande Temple of Jing. You also have, of course, useful information like the universal map key with all of the different symbols of the Jing statues, doorways, different staircases, concealed doors, and such. You also have information related to random events to determine different things, environmental events that happen anywhere within the temple. So for example, maybe a Jing block opens with the same result as opening a random door in the entry above. Now Jing blocks are crucial when it comes to navigating the entire Grande Temple of Jing and even inserting the Grande Temple of Jing in other adventures and campaigns, and we will cover those later on in this review. You also have information such as the random events that generate encounters anywhere in the temple, like for example, the ghost merchant appears. This can only happen once per solar day. If rolled again, this is a random trap instead. Or maybe the smell of the sewer heralds the arrival of something yucky. So you have all sorts of effects and events that directly act over the mechanical aspect of the Grande Temple of Jing, but also there are some others that just add flavor, like for example, a random Jing statue uncloaks near the group. This is a really nice effect because it reveals something of the divine aspect of the Grande Temple of Jing, because Jing is a deity, and I can't wait to talk about Jing later on. But it also reveals a possibility of interacting with this statue. So that's one way in which these different encounters and environmental events can affect the course of the adventurer's expedition in the Grande Temple of Jing. You also have some other tables related to, for example, Jing statues. Maybe you put a gem in the hand of a Jing statue, and the statue either closes its hand fast or slowly, depending on the value of the gem. Or maybe one of these Jing statues opens a doorway out of the temple. You also have a table containing information related to the Jing Blocks, which could be considered a sort of a portal between the different levels of the Grande Temple of Jing and even the outside world. You have different ways of opening a Jing block or activating it. Maybe you just need to touch it. Maybe you need to move a lever. Or maybe you need to touch it with fire. Maybe you need to say a password. You also have information on how to find these Jing blocks, and remember, we'll talk about those later on. You also have a lot of tables that detail everything about any chest that you would find in the Grande Temple of Jing. Is that chest trapped or locked? Or is it empty? Does it have some sort of usable object? What's the size of it? What objects does it contain? Does it hold rags or rotten food? Or perhaps a quest item or ammunition? What's the type of trap in that treasure chest? Is it a poison needle? Is it a mechanism that shoots out magic missiles? You also have a table of universal traps to generate them anywhere in the temple. Maybe there's an alarm trap, or a pit trap, or a summon monster trap. You also have a table detailing temple dressings. So maybe you find an empty sack, human bones. Maybe you find out that the air is wavy as if hot. Maybe there are dried flowers. Maybe there's a flask of oil. Maybe you notice that the humidity is 110% in this section of the temple. There are also tables featuring random events. Maybe suddenly a lot of common cats born in the temple start out hunting mice. Or maybe a bunch of Dayseeker skeletons attack if the party has a light source. Or maybe a group of human zombies in hooded robes appear alive from a distance and initiate combat only if the prey is in reach. So as you can see, there are some interesting and specific enemies here. And I will cover more about the enemies in the Grande Temple of Jing when I talk about the temple itself, because there is some interesting way in which enemies are used in this Grande Temple. Because there is something worth noticing when it comes to the use of enemies within the Grande Temple of Jing, that is from a game master's perspective. There are many other random events. Maybe you encounter a beautiful romanticore that is not immune to flattery. Or maybe you find a one-eyed basilisk. Or maybe a spider swarm rushes over the group. Many of these random events are divided by levels, and this serves as inspiration for you to create random events based on levels that the adventurers will explore later on. Or if you decide to create your own Grande Temple levels, because you have all the information to do that right here, these tables will become quite handy. When it comes to this add-on, I would actually consider it a must-have, because these screen inserts will make running the Grande Temple of Jing a lot more easy. The Grande Temple is quite big. The book contains 500 pages of content, so this is going to make running things a bit more smooth, and it's also going to be useful for other dungeons and mega dungeons. You have all of those tables to generate different events and effects and encounters, so it's going to be useful in other places. The next add-on is the Game Master and Player Aids booklet. This booklet contains several things that mainly facilitates organizing everything that is going on in the Grande Temple of Jing, and it contains some visual aids and props as well. Well, first, the campaign worksheet. This is perfect to keep track of things for more efficient bookkeeping. There are also subsections in which you can keep track of the number of days the player characters are going to stay within the temple, and how many times Jing will bring them back to life. And this is a very interesting feature of the Mega Dungeon. We'll talk about that later on. You also have a section where you can keep track of what happens when the player characters leave or when they come back. What happens when the group's time is up, because sometimes Jing likes to put a time limit to accomplish certain things within the temple, and many other things related to that, to the whole process of adventuring into the temple, interacting with the different factions, etc. Then we have Jing statues. These come in different sizes and colors. You also have different versions of them with different facings and sizes. You also have a line of statues for those sections on the wall where you have this arrangement of Jing statues. You also have Jing Blocks, and as I said, these serve as sort of tunnels or connections or portals within the temple and even beyond it, that connects the Grande Temple of Jing with places outside, with other dungeons and such. You also have tiles representing stairs and stairways. They are quite simple, as you can see. You also have additional Jing block markers. For example, you have blue markers to indicate when a Jing block is phased. You also have an indication of secret doors. You also have a stone table and a stone table pedestal, so you can arrange that. You also have a caretaker token. This is an avatar of Jing. We'll talk more about this non-player character / avatar of Jing later on. You also have platforms, pits and pit traps, and you have useful spell slot cards, power cards, and ammo trackers. These are going to be very useful in any role-playing game that you have. You also have initiative cards as well, and the Grande Temple of Jing invitation. The player characters will receive these invitations depending on how they stumble upon the knowledge of the Grande Temple of Jing, but in some instances you get sent these invitations by Jing, and so you can hand them this prop so that it feels a bit more realistic or immersive within the fantasy context. Overall, I would say that these Game Master and Player Aids are a nice option, but not a must-have. I would consider them a must-have if you are just getting started with role-playing games and you do not have too many tiles and like props, statues, and some Game Master aids. But maybe a lot of you that have been playing role-playing games for a while already have like initiative cards and ammo trackers and different tiles and statues. So for you, it will only be a bit more on the optional side to enhance the flavor of the Grande Temple of Jing, and only a must-have for beginners. Then we have the Grande Temple of Jing Player's Guide. Let's start talking about the quality of this PDF first. It's not bookmarked, however it's only 15 pages long, so it's not going to be that difficult to navigate the entire PDF. The illustrations are nice, very clear on the type of creatures that are being represented here. The graphic design is somewhat simple. I wouldn't say on the minimalistic side, but it's quite simple. And everything is well organized and written. However, I did spot one typo, but that's a minor thing. This player's guide contains basic but useful information for the player characters to succeed at taking on the Grande Temple of Jing. You have information on what the Grande Temple is, what they can expect, what they can know of Jing, details concerning character generation, including some uses for the Jingcraft skill. And this is a skill that is applicable to the Grande Temple only, that is not going to be very useful outside of the Grande Temple of Jing, at least in my opinion. And then you have information on things that you could bring with you, like different types of bandages, food and water, and other supplies. You also have some things specific to the Grande Temple of Jing. For example, you have the floating treasure bags. So these are bags that can float if they carry a certain number of pounds or less. You also have some more specific things. As I mentioned, the different types of bandages. You have normal ones, you have herbal treated bandages that give you a bonus when using them in healing checks. And you also have magic bandages that actually restore hit points and stop bleeding effects. So this is going to be quite useful for those parties that do not have clerics or druids in them. This player's guide includes new character races. You have the Chorak. Now the Chorak are massive humanoids. They look kinda like Bigfoot. They are very strong, quite sturdy, but not very dexterous. They actually become stronger with age. They also have a special protection against light effects or attacks. For example, if something causes blindness, you're going to have a good chance of resisting that effect. And they can also project curses that affect ability scores. And for each of these races, you have all of the background information and also some particular things such as different items, traditions and customs, etc. You also have the Las Dinar, which are basically crocodile men, and they are quite wise and charismatic, but not very dexterous. They are somewhat slow, but amphibious. They are also skilled in necromantic magic, and have a decent bite attack, and they have fast natural healing as well. Then we have the Quashi, which are basically humanoid badgers. They have a very powerful bite attack, and they can also enter this state of rage. They actually attack like a monk while in that state. They're also really good at detecting things via scent, and they have low light vision. Then we have the Winnow. These are born from lightning and laughter. They are a magical race that thrive in cities and live life with gusto. They feel a lot like halflings with a lightning feel to them or lightning theme. They are quite fast, quite quick, to the point that they become faster and more coordinated as they age. They actually gain a bonus to their dexterity attribute. They are great at acrobatics. They also specialize in the use of magical effects such as blur, burst of speed, haste, and for a limited number of times per day, they can actually, as a swift action, gain another move action for one round. So this race is going to be perfect for hit and run type of attacks or operations. This player's guide also contains rumors related to powerful items of legend, such as the Gear Sword or the Can o' Whoopas. Other things such as the Ice Staff of Ignus Agni, the Gloves of the Missile, the Majiri Cage, and the Kiss of the Fey Queen, which is supposed to be a weapon, possibly a spear. I would say that this player's guide is a must-have for players. There's just a lot of useful information, tips and advice and rumors that will raise your odds of survival within the Grande Temple of Jing. And for the Game Master, I would also consider this a must-have, in my opinion. The addition of new races and items makes it worthwhile. That is, you do not have to get this one. Maybe you already have some source books with items that work similarly to the ones presented here, like the bandages that I mentioned, or the bags, or maybe you have some races that you created yourself or from some other source books that could fill in the roles of those presented in the player's guide, but all things considered, I would, in a general sense, consider it a must-have. Now let's talk about the main book, the Grande Temple of Jing. This mega dungeon has been designed for the Pathfinder role-playing game. but it's quite easy to use it with other D20 based fantasy games such as Dungeons and Dragons, pretty much any edition, 13th Age, and it's also relatively easy to convert it to other systems, perhaps Savage Worlds, GURPS. You will only need to replace or use equivalent monsters to those presented in the Grande Temple of Jing. This thing is pretty massive. It's 505 pages long. When it comes to the quality, I only have a couple of criticisms. One is somewhat of a minor criticism, and it's that I found a few typos throughout the entire PDF, but it's nothing that will prevent you from understanding the content of the Grande Temple of Jing. My other criticism, and this one is a bit more important, is that a lot of the maps are quite blurry. They are not unreadable, but you will have to strain your eyes a bit as you try to make sense of the symbols and the keys, the letters. So while it is not a major issue, it is somewhat annoying. And besides that, the graphic design and the illustrations look great. They are quite in theme with what is being expressed in the Grande Temple of Jing. That is, you see all of those scenes and creatures of all of the different types of events, encounters and adventures that can be had within the Grande Temple. Although there are a few of the illustrations that look slightly blurry. But besides that, everything is well written and explained, well organized as well, and that's really important because the Grande Temple of Jing is so grande, so big, so you're going to need the best organization possible to make sense of things. The document is also fully bookmarked and the table of contents is hyperlinked, so you will have no trouble at all in navigating your way through the entire PDF. So if you wanted to run this directly from your computer or a portable device, it's doable. However, I would still print out some things or make some notes because things can get quite complex. So even considering those couple of criticisms, the quality is good. Now let's talk about the contents of the Grande Temple of Jing. First, you have a very interesting foreword giving you the design process, the philosophy behind the Grande Temple of Jing. And you can pretty much tell because of the author's Danny O'Neill's experience when he was much younger that the Grande Temple of Jing is focused on being fun. That's the priority. There are many things such as factions, storylines, all sorts of things that could connect this dungeon to a larger campaign or have it as a self-contained campaign within this mega dungeon. But the priority is quite clear. It's about having fun, discovering things, being triumphant against all sorts of dangers. And then an introduction follows. Let's talk about Jing first. Who is Jing exactly? He's a very powerful trickster deity. You get a good sense that this powerful being has been present since the dawn of time. He has stolen many things and tricked many other powers and deities. Sometimes he has stolen things related to creation and destruction. Sometimes he has modified things to the point that creatures to this day in any fantasy world look the way they do because of something that Jing did in the past. And Jing, the most important role that he plays is that he is actually a representation of the game master. You act through Jing, and you also have that relationship with your players, just like Jing has a sort of connection with the player characters. That is, you act as a referee, but also a sort of like a friendly rival. You want to challenge the players, while at the same time you want them to succeed in the adventure. So Jing is somewhat in the same way. He will challenge the player characters to the point that he could end up killing them with all of those traps and monsters that he has contained within the Grande Temple of Jing. But at the same time, he is quite generous and fair despite his trickster nature, and will reward the player characters with all sorts of blessings and powers and powerful treasure that they can find within the dungeon. The Grande Temple of Jing is the archetypal dungeon. This is the dungeon that supposedly spawned all other dungeons and mega dungeons in reality, in existence. It's that powerful. This mega dungeon contains pretty much any theme and any creature imaginable. This is not a dungeon that features a specific type of encounters. This could contain everything and anything. So the player characters and any other characters after them we'll never fully explore the totality of the Grande Temple of Jing. It's epic in scope, in flavor, and in fun. And for the player characters to have a good chance at succeeding in this astonishing endeavor, Jing will actually give them some help, at least at the beginning and throughout the course of their expedition into the Grande Temple of Jing, by, for example, allowing them to come back to life if they have been killed. It depends on how the game master wants to handle things. If you want somewhat more of a challenge, you could limit the times that a player character is allowed to come back to life after being killed due to a nefarious trap, or because some powerful enemy just butchered the entire party. They will have a chance to come back to life within certain limits. But game masters that are a bit more merciful could handle it in other different ways. For example, if the player characters have Jing's favor, that is, they are respectful and they entertain him with their courage, their daringness, their wit, Jing could bring them back to life. However, maybe Jing has set a time limit so that the player characters need to race across the entirety of the Grande Temple of Jing while they recover all sorts of treasures and artifacts, but when that time is up, they need to evacuate the temple or they will become trespassers. But within that time limit, you could make it so as if the player characters can revive an infinite number of times. In that case, the difficulty would be based on the number of days that the player characters are allowed to remain within the Grande Temple of Jing. In some ways, the Grande Temple of Jing feels a bit like a video game, in its most positive expression. You feel that this Grande Temple is sort of like a combination of theme park with sandbox. So you can see that there is somewhat of a linear progression, specifically if you're following one of the many storylines within the temple, but at the same time you can go anywhere that you want. And because the levels are so modular, especially because of their themes, you can find levels that are radically different from other places within the dungeon. And because these levels can be connected to other levels, you can move them about. They feel like pocket dimensions. You could even connect them to other places in a particular campaign world. Maybe the Grande Temple of Jing is connected to other dungeons and mega dungeons through a specific level. So it's quite easy for you to take all of these levels and insert them anywhere that you like, even outside the Grande Temple of Jing. And because you have a limited number of lives, or perhaps infinite lives, if you decide to handle it with a time limit or in some other way, it's going to feel like the number of lives or continues in a video game. And I just want to take a moment here to comment on how this mega dungeon feels quite old school, while at the same time having some hints of gonzo craziness. Not too much, just enough to get the player characters a bit surprised, sometimes unnerved, or making them feel puzzled. And it also has a bit of weirdness, just enough so that it feels surreal. And it is not by trying to come up with many new things, but rather by trying to use elements in classic fantasy and high fantasy in the most skillful way possible. Trying to surprise the player characters, to get them to face encounters that they will expect to go in a certain way, and then suddenly things take an extraordinary turn. For example, let's say the player characters are entering this sort of like necropolis, burial ground sort of area. Normally you would expect some typical undead to come out from the ground or from inside of the crypts. Maybe you would find skeletons and zombies and wraiths, and sure, you could end up finding those things, but then suddenly this undead Stegosaurus comes out of the ground and starts chasing after you. That's the type of surprises you can expect in the Grande Temple of Jing. Or what if, for example, the player characters go into this area where a group of Zorn are actually gambling, having this illegal game of cards, and this is not allowed, at least in a particular section of the Grande Temple of Jing. So now the law enforcement agents of Jing arrive, and now the Zorn must escape using their special abilities to go through the walls, the ceilings, the floor, swimming through solid rock in an attempt to escape from punishment because of their illegal gambling. But what if the player characters have been invited to this illegal card game? then the Zorn will also take them, and they will allow for the player characters to go into the walls or the ceilings or the ground with them and travel to other places within the Grande Temple of Jing. So this is one of the unusual ways in which you can move about, take some shortcuts between the different levels of the temple. Now, after that introduction, you have a section detailing how to use the book. That is telling you what you will need, the different core rulebooks of Pathfinder. And even if, for example, you lack some of the bestiaries, perhaps bestiary 2 or 3, remember that there is a system reference document available for free online, so you can check out those monsters and use them with the Grande Temple of Jing. But it's also quite easy to replace these monsters with your own monsters. Maybe you have favorite bestiary, some tome of monsters, and you want to use monsters from that book. It's quite possible and easy to make the necessary changes. You also have information on the terminology of the Grande Temple of Jing, information on how you could run the temple. Maybe you want to handle it as a one-shot, or maybe as a long campaign or a short campaign, because although this mega dungeon could serve as an entire campaign, you could also run it as separate sections even throughout different campaigns. You could take your favorite levels, or perhaps those levels that feel more adequate theme-wise in other campaigns, and you could just insert them right away. Maybe you want to connect those levels and those campaigns to deeper areas within the temple, or you just want to use them as sort of a change of pace within a campaign. This could serve for the player characters to find some things within the temple and take them outside and resume the different adventures within another campaign. But maybe you want that campaign to rail off quite a bit into the Grande Temple, and after many dangerous journeys, perhaps the player characters can come out after they have obtained new blessings and power, and now they are ready to take on perhaps a very difficult or powerful foe within another campaign. So in this case, this journey into the Temple of Jing will actually feel as a sort of advantage to reach other objectives, and it would still not feel separate from your main campaign. Maybe you want to run a horror campaign. There are horror themed levels in the Grande Temple of Jing. You just need to, let's say, cut and paste them into your own campaign. If you are running something related to dragons, there are draconic levels in the Grande Temple of Jing, or those that have strong draconic elements. Or maybe you're running a campaign that features a lot of savagery and tribes. You have tribes and savages in the Grande Temple of Jing. So there's plenty for all to take throughout the entirety of your role-playing game career. And even once that you are done with the levels of the Grande Temple, they will serve as inspiration to create your own, especially with the Game Master screen inserts with all of those tables to generate stuff, and other tables within the Grande Temple of Jing, and other thematic and narrative elements. It's going to be quite easy to keep playing the Grande Temple of Jing. You also have information on styles. Maybe you want to run the Grande Temple on the casual fun side of things. Maybe you want to play it tournament style. You also have information on Taithi, experience, and gaining levels. This is a very interesting feature of the Grande Temple of Jing. You have Jing statues all over the place. They have different effects, but some of them, or pretty much all of them, you can donate treasures and gold in order to gain experience points. This doesn't mean that you can buy experience points in those statues, but rather, as you gain experience points, you cannot level up until you pay an equal amount in gold and treasure. So if you have obtained a few thousand experience points, you won't level up until you pay the required amount. You could say that maybe this is somewhat stern or cruel, but there is actually too much treasure within the Grande Temple of Jing. And because there are constantly perhaps other parties of adventurers coming and going, and considering the different negotiations between the factions of the Grande Temple, and also other creatures and objects that Jing is constantly Jing-napping into the temple, there is pretty much no end to the treasures and riches that you can find within the Grande Temple. But because the Grande Temple of Jing is so easy to tweak and modify, you could handle it in different ways. Maybe you don't like this feature, you could run it as normally, but you could also play it in an old school style where gold pieces are the equivalent of experience points, so you will only need to focus on obtaining treasure. Now let's talk about ways in which you can go into and out of different places within the Grande Temple. Each part of this mega dungeon feels like a pocket dimension. There are many ways to go through the different rooms and corridors, but what you would consider to be the main way is through the use of Jing Blocks. They work as sort of portals or doors between the different levels and corridors and rooms, pretty much any place, but they aren't easy to find and to get into either. Sometimes they are hidden and they only appear if you are specifically searching for them. A lot of them will not be revealed or discovered unless you activate some other thing, some sort of lever or switch or condition. It could be anything. And once a particular group of characters or a character fulfills or activates this condition, they can go through the Jing Blocks. But this could also serve as a strategic or tactical advantage. For example, let's say a particular group is keyed or linked to a specific Jing block. The block counts as a phased block for that specific group. That is, they can see through the block, they can move through it, they can shoot spells and projectiles through it. So maybe you manage to get an enemy to the other side of the block and you stand behind it, and because the block does not exist for you, you can attack your enemies through that block and they wouldn't even see it coming. And even if they do see you, they will be quite confused. So these blocks are key to moving about the Grande Temple of Jing, but also you could use them in different unwinnable battles to gain an advantage over your opponent, to get some ambushes going even. And there are also some trials within the temple that trap player characters inside a particular area, and until they manage to reach a certain objective or activate some switch, push a button, whatever is needed, then the Jing block will allow them to escape from that trial section. It's important to note that when a group of adventurers goes into the Grande Temple of Jing, they are linked. It's supposed to be a Jing link, and you will see the word Jing used quite often in the Grande Temple. So now anything that affects a member of that party of adventurers usually affects the entire group. There are other ways to move through the Grande Temple, such as elevators and shafts, stairs and landings. You even have a central highway, and we will talk more about that later on. There are many Jing statues throughout the entire Grande Temple. A lot of them serve as places to donate treasure, as I said, but you could even, for example, beg at a Jing statue, and there is a chance that you may actually gain something from Jing. However, you must be careful not to abuse the powers of Jing. If you fall out of his favor, you may actually find yourself on the trespasser category instead of being a visitor in the temple. And there are more details about that later on. Some of the statues that you can find in the Grande Temple are the, for example, riddling Jing that pronounces a riddle and you need to solve it, and something good could come out of solving that riddle, but if you fail, maybe there are also consequences. You could also find other statues such as the Come Hither Jing, which is usually found in gauntlets and trials. There's also the common Gimme Jing statue that accepts donations. You also have the Praying Jing. So there is a meditative aspect to this statue. Anyone within a certain number of feet of a Praying Jing gain a bonus to their concentration checks. And if they have some spell scrolls, they can actually cast them as if those spells were on their spell list without wasting the scroll. So each one of these statues has a different effect. And there are many other things that Jing has set about in his Grande Temple. There are Jing chests that could contain armor, weapons, lots of coins, but they are typically locked and could be tricked, trapped, or both. There are also teleporting pit traps, sanctuaries. Now, sanctuaries are safe rooms within the Grande Temple. Groups of adventurers can rest within them for a limited number of days, and they can rest and recover and pray for new spells, because, for example, if a cleric has fallen out of favor with Jing, it's going to be very difficult to obtain divine power from his deities. Jing has the ability to cut off divine spellcasters from their sources of power, but within sanctuaries it is not so. Another very interesting thing of the Grande Temple of Jing, and that also accentuates the old school flavor of it, is that there are some sections where abilities, spells, and powers are completely nullified or negated for that particular section. So if you have groups of adventurers that rely too much on a specific artifact or spell or ability or power, they will find themselves in need of finding new ways of taking on different challenges within the temple. Maybe they will lose their ability to fly, so they will have to think of new ways of getting through a room, navigating some obstacles, defeating different enemies. This adds vulnerability to the different groups of adventurers and encourages them, let's say, to be flexible. There are some very unusual and perhaps potentially helpful things within the temple. For example, the temple caretaker. This is an avatar of Jing. He feels a bit like an artificial intelligence or computerized version of Jing, and this avatar can communicate information to the player characters, but it also acts as a shopkeeper. It can do all sorts of things. It could teleport objects or people. It could open blocks or close them. Pretty much anything that is needed. There's also a time difference between what is inside the temple and what is outside. You have Jing days within the temple. So a single Jing day equals 1 solar day. That's no problem at all. But 2 Jing days are the equal of 3 solar days. And 3 Jing days equal 6 solar days. And it goes on further. So a group of adventurers could actually spend some days in the Grande temple, and they come out and suddenly they notice that the campaign world outside of the temple could have changed significantly. And just imagine, maybe you are somehow allowed a year or 2 in the Grande Temple of Jing, or there is no time limit. It's going to feel as if you entered a time machine and went far into the future once you go out of the Grande Temple. And depending on Jing's plans, or maybe it's just a whim, maybe you are taken back in time. So it's quite unpredictable. And every time the player characters leave the Grande Temple of Jing, some things could reset, some things could reactivate or deactivate, and changes that have been done to the Grande Temple, perhaps they stay the same, perhaps they go back to their original state, that is without the changes that were enforced or enacted by the player characters, or maybe some things are affected, some others are not. So it's up to the game master if he wants a complete or partial reset of the temple, or perhaps everything stays the same. And there are so many magical effects within this temple. Maybe there is counter magic. Several rooms and areas of the temple feature counter magic as an additional challenge. So this magic is placed by Jing to prevent specific types of magic from working at all. You also have jinxes, which are an annoying category of counter spell that alters what spells do instead of countering them. This adds unpredictability. You also have blocking divine contact, like I mentioned, when Jing is not very happy. Some wishes and miracles could also not work as expected. You could find some enchanted Jing items that have additional effects, some of them negative, some of them positive, some of them good, some of them bad, and some things could work in unexpected and even beneficial ways. You also have kid items. This is a very special type of category. It's basically an item or object that was keyed to a particular creature that entered the Grande Temple of Jing. There is actually a welcoming ceremony sort of event that happens the first time the player characters enter the Grande Temple of Jing. So this is related to that. These keyed Jing items almost always work within the Grande Temple of Jing, and they possess a special number of powers and could even have an ego. So they are going to feel as a very personal and special item for each adventurer. And if you keep Jing's favor up, that is perhaps by giving Jing treasure regularly, by embracing the true spirit of the temple and carrying out daring acts and deeds that Jing approves of, you will get Jing's blessings. These blessings could include entering and going out of the temple whenever you like. So what if in another campaign you are being chased by a force of enemies and now you can escape into the Grande Temple of Jing and wait until they go away or whatever is needed, or search for a Jing block that connects to other places in that campaign world. There's also the blessing of the Great Central Elevator that allows you to use this other way of moving between the different levels of the temple. You could also be allowed to use the Grande Jing Highway, another important path that you can take to move through different areas and zones. And you also have Jing boons that are specific to your state or affiliation within the temple. If you are, for example, a visitor, you have boons such as the ones I mentioned of the kid Jing items, or the boon of life that allows you to come back to life if you have been killed. But if you change your condition from visitor to Templar, that is someone who lives all the time inside the temple, and this is actually possible. It would be interesting to run a campaign with the player characters becoming Templars. You could have boons such as the Advantage boon, that gives you a bonus during different rolls, or maybe you have the Armored boon, that you have a magical energy field about you, and it grants an armor class bonus, or maybe you have additional hit points or specific spells. There are also curses within the Grande Temple. If you hate Jing and get him angry at you, he will curse you. These curses are punishing but not crippling. It won't have too much of a negative effect, but it will have something that could perhaps go against the honor or integrity of your player character. Perhaps you grow some weird nose, or perhaps your hair falls off, or perhaps you change shape into something weird, or maybe your weapons, your items and clothes automatically change to a goofy combination of colors. It could be anything. Then we have information on the die of fortune and misfortune. This is basically well, it's not exactly a 5-sided die, because you have numbers between 0 and 5. So you could easily roll a 6-sided die and count the 6 as 0. And that way you would be able to determine some things, specifically random and unpredictable things that are not so easily covered by the system. Some very specific cases. They give a good example here. Maybe your character is falling towards a pit of acid, but there is a rope through the middle of your fall. Maybe you are falling near some sort of rope or chain that is hanging from the ceiling, or some sort of ledge, and maybe your character is a wizard that is not very dexterous, not very strong, but you still want to give that character a chance of saving himself. So you would roll this die of fortune and misfortune, and maybe if that character rolls a 0 or 1, he misses the rope completely and he falls to his death. But maybe he rolls a 2 or a 3. He actually manages to take hold of the rope, but there is a chance that the rope could break. So now you need to make another roll, or maybe the rope breaks and the character falls, but just very close to the acid pit, and he only takes a bit of damage. But maybe you roll a 4 or a 5, and the character manages to take hold of the rope and saves himself from taking damage or certain death. So this is just an example of how you could use this die to resolve some tricky situations. You have more details covering life inside the temple. Everything related to factions, society and culture, how a character could become a Templar or stay in a visitor type of category, or maybe the character could be an honored guest by receiving an invitation from Jing, or being transported into the temple by Jing himself. Maybe your character becomes a trespasser if you enter the Grande Temple without Jing's permission, or maybe you even become a defiler if you actively attack Jing. You could also become a devotee of Jing, or just be neutral. All of these categories have different benefits and penalties to them. You also have more details concerning the currency and treasure within the Grande Temple of Jing, that is coinage. You have tips and advice on handling the campaign sheet, the progress of the player characters within the temple and outside of it, how to play the levels outside of the temple, and reconnecting levels into new dungeons, combining different levels by level of the player characters and using them tied to different storylines. So you have the example of the Dungeon of Death. This dungeon works well with the storyline A Balance of Power. It has the feel of the original dungeon crawls of old. You also have the Grande Escape. The group is trapped in the temple by Jing, and they must escape by finding the exit at every level. You also have the Dark Necropolis. This is the perfect way of using different levels so that the player characters can explore those dark chambers, tombs, caves, and fight against the undead. You also have tips on how to add external content, maybe some other dungeons that you have purchased or that you have created yourself. You also have tweaks on how to reskin levels, modifying anything that you like. You also have information on storylines. This is a very effective way of getting the characters into the Grande Temple and feeling that they have a purpose. You could also enter the temple looking just for treasure and experience and perhaps gaining the favor of Jing. But if you wanted a specific objective, these storylines are very useful for that. So for example, you have storyline 1, which is the Elves of Siloamy. This is a storyline of rescue, exploration and adventure. Basically, a group of elves have disappeared during an expedition, So the player characters need to find out what happened to them. They actually got taken into the Grande Temple of Jing, and the player characters need to find out what happened to these elves. Jing, being the trickster deity that he is, he's going to handle things as a sort of game. So the player characters will have to enter, try to rescue as many elves as they can, and you have information on the Silumi elves. It's very easy to insert the elven village of Silumi in any campaign world, and of course it's unlikely that the elves that are being rescued will survive. Maybe you only manage to rescue a few of them. It's going to be quite difficult. You have the storyline of the Grande invitation. This is pretty straightforward. The player characters receive an invitation from Jing to go into the temple for a limited number of days, and they can try to get as many treasures and wealth as they can, and experience points, of course. You also have the Great Forest War storyline. This is a secret war between forest creatures. An alien serpent has invaded the Great Central Forest within the Grande Temple, and the group needs to help eradicate it. You also have the storyline of To Challenge a God. This is a very exciting storyline. Jing loves a good challenge, and through this storyline, the player characters will be able to take on Jing directly. That is a battle with Jing. You also have other storylines such as the Language of Birds. This is a very epic, quite amazing storyline in my opinion, that can give you a great power, the ability to speak with any animals in the campaign world. I think this is a great storyline if you are going to perhaps an island or some distant land where there are no humanoids and only animals. By talking with different magical birds, you can obtain pieces of this song that will give you the ability to communicate with all sorts of beasts. You also have the Balance of Power storyline. This is all about the ecology within the Grande Temple of Jing. This is about carrying out negotiations and conflicts with the different factions. Because the inhabitants of the Grande Temple, that is the Templars, you never feel truly safe or amicable towards them. You always feel like they could potentially turn against you, even if you make some allies. Maybe if you carry out some negotiations, you could even use their different villages as safe places within the Grande Temple. But it's somewhat of a tricky thing to keep that balance of attacking that faction's particular enemies, while at the same time proving that you are beneficial to their cause. Maybe you want to pit the Lickspit Kobolds against the Gnashteeth Orc tribe. Or maybe you want the Wolfbite Goblin tribe to fight against the Stank Grub Troglodytes. But maybe you want to ally yourself with the Hobgoblins of the Painted Toad and help them fight against the Clawhammer Crabmen. There are a lot of opportunities to gain a good standing with specific factions while at the same time becoming enemies of other factions. There are also a lot of adventure hooks to get into the Grande Temple. Maybe these are tied to one of the storylines that I mentioned, or maybe this could serve as an inspiration for your own storylines. So maybe the player characters heard about this abandoned place or ruins, and they go into that place and they get transported to the Grande Temple of Jing. Maybe the player characters were exploring some sort of cursed mausoleum, and they end up in one of the undead levels of the Grande Temple. Maybe the player characters were hunting a white stag, and suddenly find themselves teleported into any of the meta levels or sub-levels. So you'll never have a shortage of adventures and quests outside or inside the Grande Temple. You also have different endgames or outcomes. Some of them are tied to different storylines. Maybe you decide to remain inside the temple, or maybe you win a very dangerous tournament or contest within the Grande Temple and Jing allows you to live with a prize. Or maybe your characters get killed, a total party kill, and they end up in the Grave Caves section of the temple. I think that would be a good idea if you wanted to play as undead adventurers. Maybe they get killed inside the Grande Temple and they become undead, and now they need to fight to come back to life. Maybe it's some sort of a test or game enacted by Jing. Maybe you complete several trials and you obtain gifts and boons. And to top it all off in a narrative way, you have extensive information concerning Jing, about how he is sort of like a primordial thief of sorts, how he has collected so many things from perhaps so many different realities. If you wanted to become a sort of like a cleric of Jing or any sort of divine spellcaster tied to Jing, you have all the information for that here. You have many rumors and facts related to the Grande Temple of Jing. For example, there are rumors that madness rules the Grande Temple, or maybe you hear that entire armies have disappeared inside this mega dungeon. Maybe you hear that Jing's favorite sacrifice is gemstones. Maybe you hear that pets are not allowed in the Grande Temple. There is actually a sort of pet cemetery inside the Grande Temple, and I think you have a good idea of what that could cause. It's not exactly like the Stephen King story, but it's a really nice tribute. Maybe you hear other rumors such as everyone who enters the temple will meet their spiritual twin inside. Or maybe they say that the only light that works inside the temple is torchlight. You have information on the meta levels of the temple that are made up from the central chambers, the Grande Jing highway, all of the different trials, gauntlets, arenas, and vaults. Each of these sections and subsections is finely detailed. You have data on the central chambers, the entry chambers, the passage of battle, the front door, the back door. You also have information on the Grande Jing highway, how it connects everything, the different sort of like checkpoints within the highway. Some of them can only be navigated by specific characters and of particular power levels. You could adjust these things. This highway serves as a shortcut if you manage to figure out how it works. And here you will find talking birds that have to do with the storyline of the song that allows you to talk with different animals. You have more details on the checkpoints that I mentioned, that is the Dragon Gate and the Demon Gate. You need to be of a certain level to move between the different sections blocked by this Dragon Gate and Demon Gate. There are even some ways to gain positive levels and bypass these different gates, however at your own risk. This highway is frequented by the Ghost Merchant, who died hundreds of years ago and now travels the temple collecting weapons and armor from the fallen, and then he sells this to visitors. Then you have specific information concerning trials. They are tightly themed levels that are created by Jing to provide a specific test or series of tests for visitors. They have one entrance and either a hidden exit or no exit at all. To escape these trials, the group must complete a specific series of tasks. There is even a storyline tied to them, the Grande Trial. To escape this trial, the group must make it through 7 total levels. There is a possibility to be stuck in this Grande Trial forever. However, if the adventurers are successful, they will obtain great riches. We also have the gauntlets. They are punishing. They are filled with deadly hazards that are largely unavoidable. Every gauntlet has jinxes that make certain spells fail, forcing travelers to use their skills and wits to overcome the obstacles. They are quick, challenging, deadly, and rewarding. Now when it comes to these different trials and gauntlets, they have information at their entrances telling you how difficult they are. There is also a storyline tied to the gauntlets, the Great Gauntlet Run. This is for parties of adventurers that want to get out of the Grande Temple as fast as possible, so they can find this exit if they manage to conquer increasingly difficult gauntlets. There are also the arenas. These are places where visitors may face challengers individually, in pairs, or as a larger group. Maybe you will even get the chance to fight against Jing himself in the Masters Arena located on Grande level 10. If you win these arenas, you will be rewarded and you will get the Gladiator's Mark. This mark of the Gladiator will give you a bonus to bluff, diplomacy, intimidate, so it is effectively a badge of honor. You even have information on how to run tournaments, and a storyline tied to this, the Grande Tournament. This is a very challenging battle. It will pit you against the foes of the 3 primary arenas, so the most tough opponents will face off against you, and eventually you will fight Jing, or rather a manifestation of Jing, because Jing would be just too powerful to defeat in combat, at least by ordinary means. You also have information about vaults, so these are highly guarded chambers that hold great treasures. However, there is only one sample vault in this Grande Temple of Jing book, the River of Gold. This is a serpentine vault, and it allows plunderers to earn powerful treasures while sailing on a river of molten gold. After all of these instructions about the special features of the Grande Temple of Jing, you have information on the entry chambers, a wondrous dungeon that introduces key concepts of the temple. This is sort of like an introductory or presentation level into the Grande Temple of Jing. Here the group will go through a rite of passage, a sort of adventure. And if they are successful, they will be admitted to the Grande Temple of Jing as visitors. obtaining several benefits if they manage to defeat all of the foes in this challenge, and if they manage to overcome the traps and navigate the different rooms and corridors. The adventurers will also be introduced to the Great Central Elevator, which is a way of going up and down the different levels of the Grande Temple of Jing, as long as they have Jing's permission to use it, of course. I really like the entry chambers because this particular area presents many hints of what is expected to come as the adventurers go forth into the Grande Temple. It manages to whet the player character's appetite for treasure, for glory and experience points, while at the same time scaring them a little, making them think that perhaps they are going to some place that is way above their level of expertise and power. This is also a great way for the player characters to get to know the avatar of Jing, the caretaker. This caretaker is not exactly the easiest avatar to get along with, so the player characters will have to adjust to its particular personality, to put it in a way, as they try to find out many clues and figure out a way of going through the different Grande levels while obtaining treasure and staying alive. Now let me talk about some of the Grande levels. Each level is very well detailed. You have information on the politics and ecology of that level, on any sort of religion, the organization of different factions, the tactics, random events, and many different encounter areas. So for example, first we have the Kobold Caverns, caverns that host the temple's most famous denizens. These are the Lickspit Kobold tribe. They are a proud yet cowardly race that struggles for survival against the almost incomprehensible perils of the Grande Temple. They succeed primarily through devout worship of Jing. It is said that Jing taught the kobolds the skills of jelly herding. So you will find some areas like the Hall of Exploding Doors, the Jelly Pools, the Haunted Cave, and the Secret Library. Then we have the Halls of Deep Darkness, halls of darkness where the undead await the unprepared. This level was once a temple dedicated to a god of darkness, and now only skeletons and creatures that thrive in magical darkness inhabit it. You have places such as the Hall of Creeping Darkness, the Great Hall of Deep Darkness, and the Hall of Devouring Darkness. So as you can see, it's a very dark place. This particular level, and it's not my intention of adding even more darkness to the theme of this area, reminds me a bit of Dark Souls, just a bit. Now I must clarify that I'm still talking about Grande level 1. Each Grande level is divided in about between 4 and 9 sections, so it's quite large. It adds to the sense of this Grande Temple of Jing of being infinite or eternal. Then we have the Gnash Teeth Orc Halls. This is a tactical assault against a horde of nasty orcs. This rough and tumble tribe of orcs has seen it all. Once commanding huge portions of the upper levels of the Grande Temple, a group of adventurers long ago fractured the orcs' center of power. They claimed that their veteran warriors shook with fear in the face of the powerful magic their enemies used against them. So you're going to be fighting these remaining members of the Gnash Teeth tribe, but player characters should not lower their guards. It is because these Gnash Teeth orcs have been pushed to almost extinction within the Grande Temple that they are quite fearsome. So if you want to go through this orcs' stronghold, you will have to face off against the orcs and the traps that they have placed in many areas. You will find the barracks, the Dragon's Breath trap, and the armor shrine of Korchak Jing. Then we have the Green Gauntlet. This is a green-themed gauntlet that leads deeper into the temple. You will have to go through many different dangerous places, such as the 3 pits that contain a pit crocodile. You will also have to go through the Laughing Spores, the Green Slime, and the Shambling Mound. Then we have the Upper Road. This is an introductory journey down a strange section of road. It runs from the field of battle to the Dragon Gate. So this connects with the Grande Highway. You have many tables with environmental conditions that could happen here. For example, there could be a light drizzle that turns to rain on and off through the day. or maybe it suddenly becomes quite hot and dry and then hot and humid. You also have a table of random events. Maybe you find the ghost merchant that I mentioned. So this upper road is effectively your way into the Grande highway. Maybe you find a group of happy-go-lucky Jing cultists, or maybe you encounter orcs, or a goblin squad, or maybe hunting parties composed of trolls or ogres. The adventurers could go through intersecting battlefields, places where conflicts connect, and they could have some unusual encounters. Maybe the group hears the plaintive moans of a fallen warrior just off the path. They can search for him, but they never find him. Or maybe they find a group of warriors from ancient times, rushing across the road, screaming and pointing behind themselves, apparently running from a horrible beast. This road connects to many different places, such as the Wolfbite Goblin Halls, the Trials of Metal, the Halls of Chaos. You could also go through the Trial of Copper, a copper-themed dungeon and simple introduction to trials, composed of places such as the Hall of Stairs, the Treasure Chamber and the Amoeba's Lair, the Dead End and the Sap Trap. Later on, in Grande Level 2, you could go into the Training Grounds, a challenging area where visitors can train their skills. This area is all about training, and it contains physically and mentally challenging tasks that are meant to keep players on their toes. So you have different places you can go into, such as the Deep Hall, the Shifting Platforms, the Post-Pound Trap, the Pit, and the Library of Spells. And of course there's also a training room. And there are many elements to this particular area that also feel on the video game side of things. There are different puzzles and tests and challenges. Sometimes you have to activate 12 levers in sequence. So it's going to be a very fun level and potentially quite rewarding. Then you could go into the Wolfbite Goblin Halls. This is still in the Grande Level 2. An old school dungeon occupied by delusional goblins. So this is a classic dungeon level, featuring halls and chambers riddled with foul beasts and traps and puzzles. The Wolfbite Goblin Tribe are a splinter group of the mighty Wolf Brother Goblin Tribe. Through one of his tricks, Jing has placed a sort of mental disruption on these goblins, and they think that giant beetles are wolves. So they think, for example, that they could be dressed in wolf pelts, and they're actually pieces of beetle carapace. And you will find them moving about places such as the stone barricades, the huts, the beetle pens, because these goblins actually like to ride beetles, thinking that they are wolves. There's also the Twinkle Star Caverns, a starry neutral area where Templars can find water. They got their name for an obvious reason. The ceiling here is festooned with tiny magic points of light that resemble stars. Here you will find places such as the East Twinkly Cave, the Cavern of the Cave Fishers, and even a giant anthill. Then you could go into the Stinking Cigarette. This is a troglodyte edifice sitting among tar and sulfur pits. The Stank Grub Troglodyte tribe once ruled a dozen levels on Grande Level 2. However, these troglodytes committed a great sin against Jing. They started to build this ziggurat, and it was supposed to be dedicated to Jing, but at the last moment they decided to dedicate it to their warrior king instead. So shortly after the dedication ceremony, cracks appeared in the floor of the mushroom forest. Sulfur pits bubbled up from underground. Then a lake of tar oozed out of the ground and surrounded the ziggurat. The tar flooded the first tier, rendering it useless. Here you will find areas such as the Sulfur Swamp and Tar Lake, the Mushroom Cave, and the Troglodyte Village. Within this toxic environment, the adventurers could suffer some random hallucinations. You have a table for that. Maybe they see a swarm of spiders crawl out of their ears. Or maybe they will see black tentacles trying to drag them to their doom. Or maybe they could feel as if time is slowing down. Then we have the Red Gauntlet. This is a red-themed gauntlet that leads deeper into the temple, with the Hall of the Thousand Cuts, the Red Room, the Rust Pile, and the Red Bug. We also have the Trial of Silver. This is a silver-themed trial set in a wintry dungeon wonderland, with places such as the Cold Passage, the Ice Dome, and the Town Square. Now we move on to the Grande level 3 with the House Trap area. This is a dungeon themed around classic children's board games. So it is said that Jing has a fondness for gnomes, though whether this means he favors these creatures or merely derives exceptional pleasure from meddling with them, no one has ever been able to conclusively say. So there is somewhat of a good relationship between gnomes and Jing, and a group of them have decided to create complex and clever rooms within this area. So each room and section feels like it's themed around some sort of game. You have places such as the Clogged Tunnel, the Tipping Maze, and Operation Storm Giant. And as you can tell, it looks like that game Operation, where you have to remove things carefully. But instead of removing body parts, you remove weapons that are impaling this Storm Giant. Then we have the Caverns of Chaos. Caverns filled with classic challenges and an old school vibe. This area is dedicated to the forces of chaos. Not everything in the caves is strictly chaotic, but taken together, it is a place of wicked disorder. So you have chambers such as the Dripping Jing Shrine, the Cavern of the Spider Bats, the Mark of Chaos, and the Cavern of the Flymen. There are many places in this section that feel somewhat on the Greek mythology side of things. You could even find a Medusa or a Minotaur. Then we have the Halls of Chaos, an old school dungeon where anything can happen. This part of the Grande Temple is steeped in the forces of chaos, another place where the hectic powers are present. One room may have a strange trick to overcome, the next may have a deadly trap. Monsters of every type live here, typically separated by nothing more than doors. Here the adventurers could find the hobgoblins of the Painted Toad, and if they help them against their enemies, they could come to an agreement of sorts. Here you will find places such as the Greeting Hall, the Seal Chamber, the Hall of Every Door, and the Rusted Armory, the Crossroads of Death as well. Then we have the River Caves, which sport several aquatic challenges. You will find all sorts of things here. You will find sharks, kelpies, giant antlions. There is a sandy beach, a fishing hole, a shark cave, and you could even bump into a sinister sandman. Then we have the front door. This is a massive dungeon where passages can run for miles. Once every 100 years, Jing causes the front door of the temple to appear in a remote area of every world. He sends invitations to countless people by a variety of means, formally inviting them to come and plunder the temple. The front door is both inside and outside of the Grande Temple. This is a great place to insert creatures and parties from many different campaign worlds. And you will find that this area is divided in sections such as the stone doors, the golden entry, the secondary passages, and of course the Jing Blocks. There are also special rooms such as the Dark Library, or the Treasure Room, the Sanctuary, and you could even find the Wizard of Smoky Top Mountain. This is obviously a tribute to the Warlock of Firetop Mountain of the fighting fantasy game. Then we have the Trial of Gold, a trial in which the group must recover 8 golden coins. They are spread about the central room, many different passages such as the Northeast Passageway, the Northwest Passage, the Southwest Passage. After that we have the Black Gauntlet, a black-themed gauntlet that leads deeper into the temple, with places such as the Black Halls, the Dark Bridge, the Hall of Hell. This is a very demonic level. You will find things such as Hellhounds, Kerveri, Black Pudding Shadows, all sorts of things. Then we have the Adepts Arena. So this is the earliest place where the player characters can get into the action of the arena battles, hopefully win a lot of prizes and stay alive in the process. After that we have Grande Level 4, starting with the Blind Eye Caverns, a magical underdark where bad people avoid a sleeping god. So they get their name from a powerful jinx that blankets the caverns. This jinx neutralizes all light except that created by biological sources. Within this place we have sections such as the Spike Puff Passage, the Vavata Lair, the Cyclone Shaft, and the Lair of the Lightning Lizard. Then we have the halls of the hills, humongous halls filled with rolling hills, ogres, and more. This level consists of massive rooms laid out in a crude, almost amateurish fashion. The ceilings of the main chambers are 100 feet high and filled with green grass and rolling hills. Within the hills live ogres who have dug homes in the soft ground. Here you have locations such as the Nature's Sanctuary, the Open Ogre Bar, and Ogre Town. Following that, we have Nexus of Doors, a level where the biggest challenges are the doors themselves. As an entity with a love of traps and tricks, it should come as no surprise to any experienced dungeon delver that Jing has a fondness for doors. To Jing, every closed door holds so much potential. What lies beyond? Is it locked? Is it safe to open? Is it safe to even touch? These are the questions Jing delights in answering. So you have doors such as the intelligent door, the paper door, the smashing door, all sorts of doors. You even have a random door quality table. For example, maybe the door is normal, it's unlocked. Or maybe it's a double locked iron door. Maybe it's a locked glass door. Maybe the door casts suggestion on the opener. Or maybe the door casts fear. After that, we have the swampy caves. A swamp where ogre-eating trolls pull around on broken furniture. The trolls here are descended from Scrags, but they do not have their amphibious ability. Regardless, they have a love and affinity for the swamp waters here, and they pull around on individual rafts, enjoying life. They refer to themselves as the Swamp Scrag Troll Clan. In this watery and mucky area, you have places and encounters such as the Base Camp, the Steel Lust, the Swamp Town, and the Slubber's Lair. Following that, we have the Cyclone Maker, a strange dungeon where cyclones are made and exported. This small area holds a shaft that periodically creates a magical vortex, and then sends it to another place in the temple. The area is guarded by a mad druid and the rhinoceraptors that live here. So you will find encounter areas such as the Silly Scroll Emporium, the Cyclone Maker itself, and the main Rhinoceraptor Cave. Following this, we have the Infernal Observatory, a menagerie of demons that has just had its first breakout. This observatory was once a part of Jing's temple, devoted to the academic study of demonic and diabolical creatures. Various types of devils and demons were contained within habitats designed specifically for observation, and it is rumored that Jing himself would come to watch them occasionally. However, recently, the keeper of this observatory has been killed by a demon, a succubus named Amava. So now the demons are wreaking havoc in this place. You have encounter sections such as the Access Hall, the Devil Observation Deck, the Broken Chambers, the Torture Chamber, and the Sparking Floor. Following that, we have the Middle Road, a perilous journey through forest, snow, and seawater. This is part of the Grande highway. The Middle Road becomes festooned with plant life at first, as it rounds the great central forest. Then, it follows a solar pattern that varies depending on each particular section of road. During the day, each area of the highway is lit by an ambient magical light, and during the night, the highway is pitch black. Here you'll find sections such as the Jungle Door, the Cloudy Caverns, the Crystal Door, and the dreaded Grave Caves. Here you will find places and connections to many other areas, such as the Green Road, the Cloudy Caverns, the Trial of Choice, and the Grave Caves. You also have a couple of tables detailing Code Road environment effects and other events on this same road, as well as Tide Road environment effects. For example, maybe the corpse of a giant squid lies desiccated high up on dry land. Or maybe at the bottom of a dip in the road, the bones of a sperm whale have been picked clean. You also have Tide Road creatures. Maybe you can find tidal giants, fishmongers, a swarm of reef claws, a giant octopus. Then we have the Trial of Choice, a trial in which specific choices grant a specific enchantment. This trial allows players to make certain choices that will reward them with a powerful magical bonus. Exactly what that bonus is depends on the theme of the trial and the choices that the players make. It is possible for a group to do this trial multiple times, refreshing their reward each time. So you have sections such as the Dwarf Corridor, the Fallen Dwarfs area, and the Chamber of the Elf Leaders. Then we have Gauntlet of the Jing Ring, a circular gauntlet where visitors can earn powerful rings. The Jing Ring is a wondrous ancient artifact that the trickster god Jing stole from a competing deity ages ago. Jing then hid it within this Grande temple in a series of magical rooms known as the Gauntlet of the Jing Ring. He has been waiting for hundreds of years for a worthy group of adventurers to conquer the gauntlet and claim the ring. So here you'll find the slippery slope of fiery doom, the walk of the endless ring, the hall of lucky numbers, the cavern of the blink bats, and these are just some of the places. Moving on to the Grande level 5, we have the Great Central Forest. This is a huge magical forest that is a magical conservatory containing everything from jungle to boreal forest. Here you will find a way to access the Great Central Elevator. You will also find the Long Lake, the Four Roads, the Green Glamour, and connections to other areas such as the Kiss of the Fey Queen, Cragmore, and the Great Mound. Then we have the Faded Temple of the Serpent, a crumbling temple filled with dangerous serpentine magic. This area is dedicated to an obscure, long-forgotten snake goddess. Long ago, Jing transported her temple to the jungle region of the Great Central Forest. No one knows why. Here you will find areas such as the Snake Pit, the Inner Courtyard. You will find the Withered Priestess of the Serpent, and you could even encounter dangerous venom wolves. Following this, you have the forest below, an underground forest that is a wonder to behold. This place leads to the Lazinar encampment, to the Psychedelic Grove, to the Chamber of Fire, and to the Sinkhole Chamber. Then we have the Kiss of the Fey Queen, a treasure hunt through Fey Forest and an alien observatory. Long ago, Jing stole a section of the Fey Realm and placed it inside the Great Central Forest in the Grande Temple. Only Jing knows why he did it, but most stories agree that he stole something known as the Kiss of the Fey Queen along with it. Many believe the kiss to be a powerful weapon, a spear that holds the power of life and death. Few know the truth. So in this area you'll find some encounter locations such as the Exotic Blooms, the They Came from the Woods encounter, the Dying Dryad, and the Trial of 2000 Steps. Then we have the Living Labyrinth, a beautiful maze and magic grove, now twisted by aliens. The Living Labyrinth is a name for a nefarious tangle of paths that is meant to confound visitors and prevent them from reaching the sacred grove that lies in the center of this labyrinth. Originally the creation of Dryad Queen Vriaka, it has since fallen into the hands of the evil Sachet. So here you will encounter the Tree Folk, the Threshold Guards, the Tangled Path, and the Centaurs of the Moon. Then we have the Way of the Worm, an Arctic journey to the heart of a worm-filled glacier. The Way of the Worm is a metaphor for the twisting path of life that Remoras follows from its birth in the open tundra, to its digging a nest in ice, to its laying of its beautiful icy eggs, and to the eventual hatching of its offspring, which swarm and devour it. So here you'll encounter the Riders of the Storm, the Devil's Fork, the Ice Heart, and Ice Elementals. Then we have the Snow Tunnels of Bor. The Snow Tunnels of Bor is basically a scavenger hunt in a series of snow-filled caverns. The Snow Tunnels of Bor are home to Monty Hoyle, an ice devil that is trapped here by Jing. He abhors the tribe of Yeti that rules here, especially the Yeti Queen, who he finds utterly repulsive. Once long ago, he tried to slay her and take over the tribe, but the love of her servants proved too strong and he was rejected. Since then, he plots only for her demise. Here you will encounter the Path of Ice, Jing's Greeting, the Hall of Ice and Fire, the False Treasure Room, and the Ice Cube Maze. Then we have the Cloud Caves. Magic clouds act like ground, and avian races rule here. The Cloud Caves are a magical set of caves connected to the Great Central Forest and the Grande Jing Highway. They are home to numerous magical wonders, including Happy Town, the biggest landmark of civilization in this entire region of the temple. Here you will find the Smoky Workshop, the Stratus Cavern, the Cloud Colony, and the Rainbow Dream Cloud. Following that, we have the Forge, a popular smithy and store run by salamanders and devils. The creatures living here are evil to the core. However, many of them are also artisans plying their crafts and not necessarily hostile if approached with respect and currency. Here you will encounter the Fire Idol, the Mephit Rookery, the Salamander Withdrawing Room, and the Trapped Intersection. Moving on to level 6, we have the Slime Lords of level 6, a dungeon of slime where oozes mimic human gangsters. Templar oozes tell a legend of a vast sea made of pure gelatin that lies squeezed between levels in the Grande Temple of Jing. It is said to be the birthplace of protean jellies, the lowly oozes that have evolved into a myriad of other types of creatures within the temple. It is said that secretly all oozes, jellies, and slimes in the temple long to return to this gelatin sea when they die. So here you will encounter the Welcoming Room, the Downtown Slime Town, the Slime Houses, Port Town, and the Cobalt Pen. Here in the Grande Temple, oozes and kobolds do not get along. Following that, we have the Koniyata Caverns, once peaceful caverns longing to be restored to order. Deep in the temple is a tribe of turtle folk, known as the Koniyata. They are an entirely peaceful tribe that focuses on spiritual enlightenment through craftsmanship over physical prowess. They came to occupy this area in ages past, when they voluntarily left the area now known as the Cobalt Caverns, although the kobolds tell this story differently. So here you will find the Koniyata Village, the Koniyata Workshop and the Sacred Cave, the Ancient Tomb, and many other places. Then we have the Grave Caves, huge caverns filled with endless dead and undead. Jing sends Templars here when they have outlived their usefulness. He also sends visitors here when they have outlived their entertainment value. Sometimes he sends them here with honor, other times not so much. So here it's an entire necropolis type of level, with different areas and encounters such as the Grande Vault 1, the Spartan Graveyard, the Ancient Gravestone Cave, and the Pet Cemetery. Here you can actually bury familiars and animal companions and they will come back to life. And don't worry, they do not come back like in the Stephen King novel, all evil and demonic and such. Then we have the Gauntlet of Heads, a head-themed gauntlet that leads elsewhere in the temple. This level of the Grande Temple was constructed by Halagant, a deranged priest of Jing. He has created this gauntlet to serve as his test to slay unworthy adventurers that he thinks don't deserve to walk the temple's halls. And by unworthy, he means weak or foolish adventurers. So here you will encounter the gallery and encounter sections such as the Getting Ahead in the World and Hands Across the Chasm. Following that, we have the Test of the Titans, a magical adventure where visitors grow as they slay giants. This is a combat trial that allows characters to grow in size as they defeat giants, literally. So here you will encounter, of course, many giants: Add-ons, wood giants, cave giants, frost and desert giants, stone giants, ash giants, all sorts of giants. And then we have the Journeyman's Arena, a challenging battleground for experienced gladiators. So this is a square type of arena with many different scenarios, such as the Cages of Doom, the Ambassador of Jing, the Winter Blast, the Power Cell. It features mainly scenarios with special rules for each battle. Maybe when combat begins, the floor changes to slippery ice. Or maybe whenever a spell is cast in this area, the spellcaster may make a concentration check. If they succeed, the spell slot is not used. Then we have the River of Gold, a river of molten gold where Jing keeps several treasures. This is an incredible feature of the Grande Temple. Part of the temple's inner workings, the river also acts as a protection for several powerful items that Jing has hidden away. So here you will encounter the hub, the Jing's Jest Saloon, the observation room, and the River of Gold itself. Then we move on to Grande level 7 with the Drowned Halls, an underwater dungeon ruled by an evil race of Manta people. Of all of the Templar races currently vying for control of the Grande Temple, the Manta Kin of Grande level 7 are the closest to success. Left alone for millennium in their underwater abbot, they have learned the ability that has allowed them to hack into the pit traps of the temple. They have placed teleport spells into each pit, and this has brought them food, slaves, and magic for several hundred years. So here you will encounter sections such as the Antechamber of the Race, the Great Chamber of the Race, the Shallow Hall, the Air Sucker Trap, and you can encounter the Ray Trainers, or the Armored Guard. Moving on, we have the Grey Zoo, a monster menagerie where the group may become the next exhibit. This zoo is one of Jing's favorite places. It is cared for by one of his most loyal servants, an arcane trickster known as the Grey Keeper. He wears a modern-day safari outfit, completely made out of grey-colored material. He appears old and hunched with a long grey beard. He sells it well. He has some pretty nasty intentions. Here you could encounter the Giant Wolf, the Womanticore, the Horned Serpent, the Dire Crocodile, and the Spiked Thunderer. Then you have the Lay of the Dead Lords. Powerful undead and demons vie for control of an epic magic book. This area is dominated by a pair of powerful undead. A female vampire and a male lich have dominated this area for centuries. They are currently involved in a struggle to complete the sections of a powerful magic book. Here you will encounter sections such as different alcoves populated by undead. You'll find libraries, the tomb, the guest chamber, the crypt, and the shrine. Now this illustration and the relationship between the vampire Daciana and Athanasius the Lich somewhat puzzles me, because they are supposed to be lovers and at the same time like rivals, but can a Lich actually love someone or feel attraction towards someone? I always thought that the man parts of the Lich ended up shriveled during the process, so this puzzles me quite a bit. Then we have the Stormwrack Caverns. This is a place where every kind of weather is manufactured. Here you will find tables for creature alterations and transformations, because perhaps a member of the group is struck by transformative lightning and suddenly his hair changes color, or maybe everywhere on your skin that you have hair, the hair falls out entirely, or maybe your fingernails grow amazingly long, or maybe your arms change to that of perhaps an octopus or a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a gorilla. That is, you grow either tentacles or small arms or really large arms. Or maybe you become a 10-foot tall chicken. Maybe you are transformed randomly, like the spell Reincarnate. So many strange things could happen here. You have encounter areas such as the Snowfall Field, the Waterfall Halls, the Munsuk Rock, and a connection to the Grande Jing Highway. Then you have the back door, a little known entrance only used by the most powerful visitors. This is a quick way into the temple for those of higher level. It leads directly to the Stormwrack Cavern, which provides access to the Grande Jing Highway and the Great Central Elevator. This is divided by sections in the Watery Cave, the Beach, and the Misty Cave. Then we have the Lower Road, a physical and spiritual journey to the end of the Grande Highway. This runs from the Demon Gate to Road's End. This is a long stretch of road requiring almost 9 days to travel. This is the most dangerous section of the Grande Jing Highway. Few survive the journey. Here it is divided by different sections and encounters such as the Under Road, the Gargoyle Cavern. It is also connected to the Lay of the Dead Lords, the Underwaterfall, and the Dwergar Outpost. Many different enemies and beasts patrol this area. If you manage to survive that, you will move to the Grande level 8, the Magic Desert, an anti-magic desert where players must fight to retrieve their magic. In this area, Jing has created a magical patchwork desert. He has connected pieces from 8 separate desert regions, stitching them together with magical walls of force nicknamed Wave Walls. So here you will encounter the Golden Desert, the Tan Desert, the Orange Desert and the Tawny Desert. All sorts of deserts in this area, of different colors and features and effects. Then we have the Temple of the Beast. Crazed cultists summon a horror from beyond the stars. This is a Lovecraftian sort of level, in which you will encounter the White Hole, the Grey Hole, the Black Hole, the Killing Room, barracks, meditation rooms and a suicide room. You will also find staging areas and the temple proper itself. Then we have the Halls of the Gods, a series of halls where Jing poses as a multitude of deities. When Jing created his temple, he angered many gods by capturing their followers and tormenting them within his labyrinth. It was not long before the gods banded together and demanded satisfaction. Cornered, Jing complied with a twist. First, he allowed the open worship of any god, but banned the creation of statues depicting any god but himself. He then created sanctuaries to generic gods and hid them among the temple, where only visitors could find them. Finally, he created these halls filled with exacting replicas of all the gods. Sort of. So here you will encounter the Hall of the Merchant, the Hall of Metal, the Hall of Courage, and the Hall of the Insect Lord. So many deities are represented in this part of the level. Then we have the Gauntlet of Science. An abusive Etin hosts several science-themed challenges. This gauntlet is a non-linear adventure in which the group's performance is judged by a creature known as the Etin Mathcaster. This evil beast has monitored countless groups over the years and is consistently disappointed. In its mannerisms, it acts like a virulent and abusive math teacher, cursing and moaning at the hopelessness of the groups even when they are succeeding. So here you will encounter areas such as the Hall of Reverse Light, the Suspended Chest, the Great Wheel of Jing, and the Child's Room. Moving on to level 9, we have the Undersea, a giant underground sea that occupies all of level 9. As its name suggests, it's an underground magical sea that was built by Jing in ages past. It contains salt water and once sported an abundance of life. The water is now cursed and virtually everything within it is gone. All that remains are ghosts and a few species altered by the curse. So here in the Undersea, you will find elemental temples. There's also a connection to the Grande Jing Highway. There is also the Isle of the Undersea. There are plenty of Jing statues and a direct connection to the tomb of the sea god. This is the final resting place of an evil deity. Once, long ago, seafarers told tales of an evil sea god that resembled a giant black shark. They spoke of how the god could command the waves and storms to do its bidding, and how its bite could break a ship in two. All around the seas they feared the evil beast, and sailors steered clear of the waters where it had been last seen. It is said that once the beast destroyed an armada that was sent to slay it, and once it ruled the seas with fear and death. Here you will find a rainbow dome that effectively works as a prismatic wall. You will also encounter wrecks and bones, a connection to the Great Central Elevator as well. And in the inner tomb it's going to be quite dangerous. You will also be able to find treasures, but Mariliths and Locatans as well. After that we have the Grim Fandango. This is a ghost ship manned by depressed and listless pirates. So this pirate ship was stolen by Jing with his teleportation lightning. The ship was on the high seas with a hold full of cargo when it was brought into Stormwreck Cavern, where it currently is. And it is from there where it fell down a drain into the Undersea. Nobody knows what happened next. Those on the ship remember falling for a seemingly endless period before waking up as the ship was sailing the dark waters. They had a few strange encounters, but they eventually came upon the Under Isle, where they have been docked ever since. So here you have the description of the crew, which are now actually ghosts, so they never woke up in their entirety. They actually died. So here you have the captain, the first mate, and all of the stats and information about the crew. And they are actually mostly neutral in their alignment. So when you encounter them, it's not going to be necessarily a hostile situation. You have details on every part and section of the ship, like the main deck, the crow's nest, the captain's cabin, the quarterdeck aft, the quarterdeck fore. Next, we have the corrupted water temple, a temple of elemental water overrun by the forces of fire. So this temple sits on the western edge of the undersea, and it is most commonly accessed from the Grande Jing highway. This temple is dedicated to the element of water and was once guarded by powerful water priests and elementals. However, some time ago it was overcome by the fire elementals from the temple across the sea. Now corrupted, it sits at the edge of the undersea, spewing smoke and ash. In this section you will encounter the outer guardians, fallen clerics, you will explore the courtyard, you will see the fiery temple pillars and the fire pits. After that, we finally reach level 10, starting with Road's End, the final stop in the temple, where the elevator and highway end. Crystals are set in the walls, here in 3 perfect rings around the room. Following that, we have the Madhouse, a surreal dungeon to challenge the most powerful visitors. This is quite an epic site dedicated to madness. Not the madness that comes from the lust for power or from experiencing an endless array of horrors. Rather, it is the madness that comes from having one's understanding of the universe challenged. It is the madness that comes when one realizes how insignificant they are in the cosmos and how futile their choices can often be. Those who survive the madhouse always remember it as a place where their frustration and bewilderment almost cause them to lose their minds. So here you will encounter the Room of Many Doors, the Cavern of the Beast, the Silhouette Door, the Endless Passage, and you will encounter the surreal Icosa Golems. Then we have MPLO, an epic dungeon where Jing has trapped a god. In this level, the group meets a god known as the Maker. Jing has kept him trapped in the temple for ages, doomed to make items that are cursed to run the whole place. He is currently working on a huge chain for some unknown purpose. You will encounter the Energy Vault, the Fate Central, the Great Hall, and the Time Vault. Next, we have the Gauntlet of Grimm. This is an epic gauntlet, where success means escape from the temple. And finally, we have the Master's Arena, an epic battleground for the most experienced gladiators. Here you get a chance to face off against Jing directly, at least through his champion, Dracus, the Demo Dragon. And so that's the entirety of the Grande Temple of Jing. Or rather, the basic structure. There are many things that I left unsaid. Many different encounter areas, sections, traps, monsters, all sorts of enemies and potential allies. There's just so much. And like I said at the beginning, this is only the start of the Grande Temple of Jing to be used in your campaigns. You have all of the information here to use it in several ways, and I will talk more about that at the conclusion of this review. Following that, we have 2 pieces of fiction. One is written by Dave Gross, the Torchbearer. Now, as I am talking about these 2 pieces of fiction, I'm going to keep it spoiler-free, so that you are surprised by the different twists and turns and information presented in the stories. The Torchbearer features a party of adventurers that goes into the Grande Temple of Jing. This will serve as inspiration for the game master, not only to run the temple, but to come up with his own encounters perhaps, and further expand the Grande Temple of Jing. But more than anything, it's going to serve the game master to understand how to run the Grande Temple of Jing. So in this story, the focus of the plotline, or how you experience the events of the Torchbearer, happens through the eyes or the perspective of a Torchbearer. This is somewhat different from your standard fantasy adventures, where the focus is usually put in the eyes or the thoughts of one of the members of the party. But this Torchbearer has just been hired to adequately enough carry the torch. However, because many of the other hirelings have died, he's also serving as a pack mule. You will find many fantasy stereotypes in this story. You have the big and tough frontliner that isn't very intelligent. Then you have the mysterious rogue, you have an exotic type of spellcaster, a preachy divine spellcaster as well. I think the presentation of these stereotypes was intentional to draw your attention to what the torchbearer is thinking and experiencing. I like it that they add a lot of detail when it comes to navigating the entire Grande Temple of Jing, because in some other pieces of fiction they almost handwave things related to survival and navigation. So for example, the difficulty of reading a map and not getting lost, the possibility of actually suffering some sort of disorientation. Sometimes you can get confused, you do not know if you're going up or down, especially in the Grande Temple of Jing, where there are so many magical effects. You really get a good grasp of how difficult this is, and there's going to be battle. You will see how the party of adventurers try to figure out their way through the Grande Temple of Jing, and by the end of things you will see how it's worth it to be respectful of Jing, or at the very least be a good sport and pay him a tithy every now and then, to show your gratefulness that despite the Grande Temple being such a dangerous and lethal place, it's also an opportunity to come out with greater power and wealth. So overall, it's a good story that gives you a really good idea of the types of adventures that you can run within the Grande Temple of Jing. Then we have The Language of the Birds by Kevin Andrew Murphy. This is quite a pragmatic piece of fiction, in the sense that it is directly related to one of the storylines in the Grande Temple of Jing. If you manage to piece together the different parts of the song, you will be able to obtain the ability to speak with all sorts of beasts. The story features a character, Lebec, a Meistersinger, a bard, that goes on an adventure that will finally lead him to discover the identity of the King of the Birds. Now it's pretty obvious who the King of the Birds is. I immediately figured it out as I read The Language of the Birds, but it's more about their journey rather than the destination. You will see themes of magic and death and battle, and you will understand more about the capricious nature of Jing, and how even within his trickster attitude, he is always acting with a purpose. The Language of the Birds gets quite poetic several times, and it seems to me, I'm not an expert in styles, but it seems to me like a modern version of those poems and epic journeys that were told in, for example, in late medieval times or early Renaissance. It kind of feels like that. And what I like the most about this fiction is because you will be revealing the Song of the Birds to the adventurers as they keep moving forward. I can already see a lot of players trying to figure out if there is some sort of clue within the different verses, trying to analyze each paragraph, see if they can find out something about the Grande Temple or what this song is all about. So it's a great piece of reading for the game master that perfectly expresses in a very colorful way the magic and mysticism within the Grande Temple of Jing. And for the player characters, it's great that they gain an understanding of this story little by little as they follow the storyline of this song. In a way, you could also consider it as a sort of poetic grand tour through the essence of the Grande Temple, through what is that makes the Grande Temple of Jing be such a wondrous and mysterious mega dungeon. At the end of the book, you have several appendices. You have information on riddles, on statues that teleport the group. There's also information on statues that give out rewards and punishment. You also have bestiary, and it's very easy to insert any of these beasts and monsters into other adventures and campaigns. You also have a list of the non-player characters that you can encounter. You also have information on all the treasures that you can find. You also have a couple of empty maps. And because of the variety of the different levels within the Grande Temple, it's very easy for you to expand the Grande Temple of Jing, take several rooms and make all sorts of combinations, switching the furniture, changing some corridors, adding some rooms. So this dungeon is pretty much endless. It's almost a mega dungeon toolkit in a way. You also have a campaign sheet, similar to one of the things included with the add-ons. You even have a place to make your own notes about the different changes or pretty much anything that could happen within the Grande Temple of Jing. With all of those factions and magical effects, it's going to be quite handy to keep this close by. So what do I think of the Grande Temple of Jing? This is the most useful mega dungeon that I have seen so far, and it's also an idea of an infinite mega dungeon. Even though this book contains all of the Grande levels, all of the storylines, all of the adventures, once you are done with those, there is no reason to stop exploring the Grande Temple of Jing. There are so many tables to generate all sorts of random things. Like I said a few moments ago, this feels a lot like a Mega Dungeon toolkit and not just a complete campaign or several short campaigns that you can use. The only thing that keeps this from becoming a complete Mega Dungeon toolkit is that you do not have a system, perhaps of tables and such, to randomly generate rooms. But that is in a structural sense, because when it comes to the monsters, the treasures, the traps, the effects, you have plenty of that. But this Grande Temple of Jing was never meant to be a Mega Dungeon toolkit. This is a Mega Dungeon containing all sorts of things to further expand it, to use it for the entirety of your role-playing game career. It just means that you will have to homebrew everything outside of this material. But there is plenty here. A casual group will be playing the Grande Temple of Jing for a couple of years and perhaps a bit more. And I think the greatest value of the Grande Temple of Jing is that it's very easy to continue the adventures, continue campaigns and campaigns, to make it an infinite type of Mega Dungeon. The reason why I said this is the most useful Mega Dungeon that I have seen so far is that because each of the Grande levels and the sub-levels and sections and such, they are themed to a particular type of experience. They are tailored to represent horror, classic fantasy, high fantasy, some weirdness and surrealism as well. There are also some Lovecraftian factors and mythological trappings tossed here and there. You can take any of these Grande levels or any of the encounter areas or rooms or enemies and use them in any sort of campaign. I think the best way of using the Grande Temple of Jing is to spread out the storylines through different campaigns. So for example, maybe you're playing a campaign that features a lot of undead. You could take some of the undead levels in the Grande Temple of Jing and just connect them into your campaign. Suddenly the characters step into this door that was actually a Jing block and they end up within that section of the Grande Temple. Maybe you're playing something that is related to orcs and kobolds or ogres and trolls. You also have levels in theme with that. And I also recommend using it as a sort of recurring Mega Dungeon that appears throughout different campaigns, because the blessings, the treasure, the powers, everything that you can obtain within the Grande Temple will be an advantage in some other campaigns. So maybe you're fighting against an enemy or faction that is just too powerful and you decide to brave the Grande Temple of Jing, to go inside and risk death in order to obtain an advantage over your enemies. So maybe you're using it with, let's say, Forgotten Realms and you're fighting against the Centarim or the Red Wizards of Thay. Maybe you decide to go into the Grande Temple because you know that your group of adventurers or adventuring company is not a match for them, and now you go into the temple, obtain all sorts of artifacts and weapons and such, and now you can go out back into your campaign world and take on the Centarim or the Red Wizards or anything, because now you have greater power and wealth drawn forth from the Grande Temple. You could also run it as a complete campaign, just an entire campaign inside the Mega Dungeon, taking on all of the storylines and such, and even inserting some of your own stories and ideas. But I just think that the benefits of obtaining all of those treasures and magical effects within the Grande Temple, it would be somewhat of a waste not to use them in other campaigns. Maybe you're going to be handling things at an epic scale, maybe epic levels, using the Epic Levels Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 3.0, 3.5, or maybe using the Mythic Adventures book for Pathfinder. Maybe you will be able to use those powerful artifacts beyond level 20, but there are also so many lower level special weapons and items that I think it would be a waste not to use them in some other campaigns and storylines. So although it's also going to work great to use this Grande Temple of Jing as a single mega campaign, I think it's much better to spread out different sections of this Mega Dungeon with different campaigns that you will be running through the entirety of your gaming career. I already gave my opinion of the add-ons at the beginning of this review. I think they are all worth it, although some of them are a bit more optional than others in my opinion. And going back to the Grande Temple, even if you do not want to run this as a cohesive storyline or a grouping of all of the storylines, you could easily take anything from the Grande Temple of Jing and use it in your own dungeons and mega dungeons and adventures. It's going to be very easy to cut and paste everything, especially thanks to the Jing Blocks. You have a clear delineation or categorization of pretty much any element within the Grande Temple of Jing, it's going to be very easy for you to choose or pick the right things for your own dungeon and adventures. So I highly recommend that you get the Grande Temple of Jing. This is a mega dungeon that will be useful to you. In one way or another, you will find a use for anything that is contained within the Grande Temple. But definitely, the greatest value of this mega dungeon is that it's unlike any other mega dungeon. There are so many great and awesome mega dungeons, but once you finish them, you usually put them to the side unless you're going to be running them for several groups, or you have to wait for more rooms and sections to be added commercially, or you have to homebrew your own. But with the Grande Temple of Jing, even creating new sections for the mega dungeon, it's going to be very easy. In other mega dungeons, you have to create things that are adapted to a particular theme or storyline, but with the Grande Temple of Jing, because you find so many things within it, you have themes of action, madness, comedy, horror, anything that you feel inspired to create, you will be able to place it within the Grande Temple or outside of it, connecting it to the outside world. So sometimes you could get like a game master's block. Perhaps you can't create like a good classic fantasy level and you only get these ideas of oriental and exotic levels. Just start focusing on creating those levels using all of the different tables and ideas from the Grande Temple of Jing book, and just toss them into the temple. It makes sense, it's in theme with the eclectic nature of the Grande Temple of Jing, of having so many places. It is quite kaleidoscopic in its nature, that any sort of level, no matter its theme or story, it's going to fit in the Grande Temple of Jing. Well, thanks for watching my review. Remember to check out the links in the description below. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.